제2회 코리안 디세널 디스커션 포럼에 참석해 주셔서 감사드립니다. Thanks for joining for the second Korean Decennial Discussion Forum. 보안 문제로 저희가 그 등록과 참석 과정에 좀 변화가 있었고요. 현재 패널리스트와 어텐디 사이에 사용할 수 있는 기능이 조금 제한이 되어져 있습니다. We made changes to the registration and attendance process and the different features available between the panelists and attendees now. 세션 45분간 진행할 예정입니다. 영상은 녹화해서 이후에 DCR 유튜브에 게시될 예정이고요. 가능한 한국인은 한국어로 질문을 해주시기를 부탁드리겠습니다. This session will be 45 minutes long and it is recorded for upload YouTube later. And please feel free to ask your questions in English if you are not a Korean speaker. We can provide the English-Korean interpreter simultaneously. 지금 성함을 변경하셔서 전체 이름을 써주시기를 권장드리고요. 지금 참석자는 음소거 상태이시고 비디오는 오프되어 있습니다. 그래서 질문하실 때에는 손들기 버튼을 눌러주시고 그럼 저희가 패널리스트로 인바이트해서 참여할 수 있도록 하겠습니다. 중간에라도 질문이 생각나셨을 때 채창에 올려주시면 이후에 그 Q&A 세션에 활용하도록 그렇게 하겠습니다. Okay, all attendees, microphone is muted and video is off. If you do like to ask your questions, just click the raise your hand button at the bottom and we will invite you as a panelist to your videos on. And if you can drop a questions on chat if you at any time we can gather for the Q&A sessions. 저희가 오늘 그 세 분의 굉장히 다양한 경험을 가진 엑설런트한 패널을 모셨는데요. 패널이 들어오셨습니다. 일단 저희가 K-컬처, K-푸드 굉장히 열풍이 불고 있는데 이분이야말로 K-서저리를 이제 이끌고 계신 분이시죠. 그리고 이분을 빼고 제가 라테랄 펠브 림프노드 다이섹션을 얘기할 수 없을 것 같습니다. 최기석 교수님 모셨고요. 개봉영 교수는 코리안 그 라테랄 펠브 림프노드 다이섹션 그룹에 굉장히 중요한 역할을 담당하셔서 저희 코리안 LPR의 그 전부를 알고 계신 분이라고 생각하겠습니다. 박윤영 교수님은 굉장히 날카로운 인사이트를 가지고 훌륭한 리서치웍 진행하고 계셔서 아마 오늘 이 디스커션 포럼에 있어서 굉장히 그 인사이트풀한 그런 디스커션을 진행해 주시지 않을까 하고 기대를 하고 있습니다. We are excited to have three very amazing panelists today to join us, and Kyusuk Choi, who is the real absolute legend for the field of lateral lymph node dissection. Bong Hyun-Kye has a central role in the Korean lateral lymph node dissection group. He knows everything about the Korean LPRN group. And last, but definitely not least, we have Professor Yoon Young Park. She has known for very sharp insight and outstanding research, and she may be the key panelist of today. 그리고 스페셜 게스트로 조지장 선생님 모셨습니다. 사실 조지장 선생님 뭐 소개할 필요도 없을 것 같습니다. 너무 유명한 분이시고 굉장히 서지컬 온콜로지스트로서 정말 이렇게 정말 자이언트라고 할 수 있겠습니다. 라테랄 펠브 림프노드 다이세션을 그 정말 모던 온콜로지의 중심으로 가지고 오신 분이라고 생각이 되고요. 오늘은 선생님의 The Learning Curve for Robot Lateral Pelvic Lymph Node Dissection for Rectal Cancer, A View from the West라고 10월에 게재된 논문에 대해서 디스커션을 하도록 하겠습니다. We are honored to have Dr. Professor George Chang as a special guest today. Actually, he doesn't need any kind of introduction to us. We know him very well. He's a true giant in the field of surgical oncologist and very important figure to bringing the LPRND in this discussion today. We are now talking about the learning curve for robot lateral pelvic lymph node dissection for rectal cancer, a view from the West, published in October in this journal. So could you please say hello to everyone and take a brief summary of your paper?
Great. Thank you so much. It's really, first of all, congratulations. Now, this is your second Korean DCNR Journal Club. Really excited and honored to be here and present to this group. I'm especially honored to have such a esteemed panel to discuss it. including, as you say, K surgeon himself, Professor Choi, as well as Professor Key and Professor Park. So really looking forward to the discussion. I will share my slides. So this is the paper published in the October issue of Diseases of the Colon and Rectum, the Learning Curve for Robotic Lateral Pelvic Lymph Node Dissection for Rectal Cancer, a View from the West. So patients with low rectal cancer, I think this group is well aware, are at risk for metastasis to the lateral pelvic lymph nodes, and these metastases actually account for the greatest proportion of local regional failure with high quality central surgery, high quality TME surgery. We now know also that neoadjuvant radiation therapy is inadequate treatment in the setting of clinically positive lateral pelvic lymph node metastasis. And then finally, lateral pelvic lymph node dissection is an important therapeutic treatment strategy for patients who have evidence of lateral pelvic lymph node metastasis in the setting even of neoadjuvant therapy. Unfortunately, there's been relatively slow adoption of this technique in the West, largely due to lack of familiarity with the anatomy and differences in our training background. So the purpose of this study was so we have been performing lateral pelvic lymph node dissection at MD Anderson in the setting of a Western treatment approach with total neoadjuvant therapy. And so the objective of this study was to analyze the learning process associated with introducing and establishing a robotic lateral pelvic lymph node dissection technique within a Western institution. This is a single institutional retrospective consecutive cohort study. Patients were identified from 2012 to 2021. In the early years of experience, there were very few patients, and the numbers have increased in the more recent years. And in fact, since 21, we've had further increases in the annual rates. Those patients who underwent common or external iliac lymph node dissection exclusively, or those who had undergone en-bloc resection. Sometimes it is required that we perform en-bloc resection of the lateral pelvic lymph nodes along with the internal iliac vessels as an example. These were all excluded from analysis. And then our primary outcomes analyzed were the total number of lymph nodes and the rate of urinary retention, or the incidence of urinary retention. And we assessed both single and institutional surgeon learning curves. We did this by using a cumulative sum analysis, or the QSUM analysis. This is a statistical process control sort of technique that's used for quality assurance. But it can also be used to assess learning curves, and it's been applied in healthcare for that indication. It is a sum of deviations and observations of interest over time. So the deviation of a particular observation, such as the number of lymph nodes, or the incidence of urinary retention or other complications, or time of surgery, as an example, plotted against the sample mean, and that's sort of a typical way that it's used, or against some other target value, but in this particular case, it was against our sample mean. And then we used a two-sided Bernoulli-Kusum chart to identify alarm signals, looking for those time points where there was a risk for being statistically out of control, being more than 3 standard deviations. So next. So these are the findings from this study. This is a standard demographic table, but I just want to point out these. There are a lot of numbers on this table, but I just want to point out a few salient features. A relatively heavy population cohort, very typical for the patients that we see with a mean BMI of 29. All patients essentially underwent neoadjuvant radiotherapy and chemotherapy as well. The total number of evaluated lateral pelvic lymph nodes in the cohort was a median of 6. And the rate of positive lateral nodes was 33%. We have utilized historically a super selective strategy for lateral pelvic lymph node dissection, and our criteria continue to evolve, but we had strict size, and then now size and imaging, and then also now our size and imaging both pre and post, and now increasing reliance upon the pre-treatment information. But the overall rate of positivity amongst dissected patients was 33%. And then you can see the overall rate of tumor regression, the TRG score, in the lower right-hand side. When we look at operative outcomes, most patients underwent unilateral, less than 1 in 5 underwent bilateral. The resection margin status, or CRM status, was R0 and 94%. The median length of stay was 4 days, and the overall rate of major grade 3 or higher complications was 15%. You can see some of the pertinent outcomes, such as the rate of neuropathy. This is referring to obturator neuropathy, urinary retention, reoperation, and readmission, all sort of in line with a group of complex rectal cancer patients. So as I mentioned earlier, we evaluated both single surgeon and institutional learning curves, largely because many of the cases were from a single surgeon. And so this is a data from the single surgeon learning curve, and we can see that when we look at the QSUM analysis for the number of lymph nodes harvested on the left upper panel, we can see there was an inflection point after 12 cases, and beyond which time we had a positive deflection of the QSUM plot. And then when we look at the rate of urinary retention, there was a turning point, although there was a turning point around 20 cases. And when we look at the rate, the incidence of, the rate of urinary retention in the first 20 versus the second half of that of the cohort, we can see that there was significant improvement in rate of urinary retention. The lower plots show the Bernoulli plots, and the upper red and the lower orange show the control limits. And we can see that there were no significant alarm signals, maybe one in the early experience for urinary retention, but no alarm signals then beyond that. So this is a useful technique that we can use to identify if there's a deviation. In other words, that there's consecutive cases where we have some event of interest, such as urinary retention or urinary dysfunction or other complication, then we will see that the Bernoulli plot will start to deviate further from the mean or further from the zero and cross over one of these control sort of boundaries. And that is maybe the first indicator that we should be reviewing our processes or reviewing our technique, et cetera. But we did not observe anything, any of those types of events here. When we look at the total number of lymph nodes, really the control limit of interest would be the lower one, the orange one, as we would anticipate a larger number of lymph nodes wouldn't necessarily be an alarm signal. And then this is the institutional learning curve. So over time, we added additional surgeons. The numbers and the arrows represent when a new surgeon began to utilize the technique, still at a relatively slow rate for the new surgeons until we got to surgeon number 4. But we can see that there were sort of 2 inflection points, one at around 13 cases, and then one at around 26 cases, where there was a plateauing of that QSUM plot between 13 and 26 cases, representing sort of that second phase, and then the rise in that plot in the third phase beyond 26 cases. And then for urinary retention, an inflection point around 26 cases, and we can see the differences in the overall rate of urinary retention in the first and then second phase of the study. And then similarly, the control charts below, there was a potential alarm signals early on. You can see in a case, I think 6 and 8 for urinary retention, but no alarm signals for the number of lymph nodes recovered. To our knowledge, this is the first report from a Western center. Traditionally, the Western centers have not utilized lateral pelvic lymph node dissection, which, as everyone here knows, has primarily come from Japan and now really been advanced in Korea as well. There was a relatively short learning curve in line with previous reports, although the overall number of cases identified here may be too small to identify further phases of the learning curve. There was the potential for an institutional learning effect, and this is a possible encouraging observation, which is that we can have mentoring across surgeons within an institution. Probably doesn't make sense given the number of cases for everyone at a particular institution to be utilizing this technique, but when there is a more experienced surgeon, then that may allow for a more rapid learning effect for newer adopters. But there are some limitations. It's a single referral center with prior expertise in robotic and complex beyond TME resection, including robotic complex beyond TME resection. So it may not be as generalizable. And we did not have unfortunately, detailed data on the operative time for the lateral pelvic lymph node dissection component of surgery, but that information, and that's classically used for most QSUM analyses, but that information may have provided greater insight. So with that, thank you so much for the honor of the invitation to present our paper to this group. I'm looking forward to our panelists, and thanks to Dr. Park and Dr. Galandiak for hosting this event.
네, summary 해주셔서 감사합니다. Thank you, Georgie. It's very informative summary. 저 논문을 다 읽어보셨을 거라고 생각해서 저희가 이거 해석 없이 바로 디스커션을 진행하도록 하겠습니다. Let's just dive into the discussion. By the way, I have to introduce our interpreter, Professor Young-Il Kim. Could you show your face, Young-Il Kim? Yes,
Yeah.
he is our interpreter. He will doing the Korean English interpretation today. He is very fantastic interpreter, but much more impressive surgeon. I have to say that. Yeah.
Thank you.
일단 okay. Start. 저희가 오늘 디스커션 메인 주제인 러닝 커브를 어떻게 매저할 것인가에 대해서 먼저 시작을 해보면 좋을 것 같습니다. Okay, let's just start with how to measure the learning curve is the main topic of today. 사실 그 서전들이 대부분 러닝 커브에 굉장히 관심을 가지고 있는 것이 언제 이거를 잘 어댑트해서 사용할 수 있는 것인가에 대해서 굉장히 관심을 가지고 있고 여러 가지 툴로 매저를 하고 있지만 실제로 이게 이제 객관성을 확보하기 어려운 부분들이 있습니다. Many surgeons care about the learning curve because in the adapting the complex technique in their real practice, the various types of metrics and parameters are used to measure the learning curve. It is hard to show objectivity. 그래서 일단 지금 이 연구에서는 lymph node harvest number, 그다음에 urinary retention 이것이 이제 learning curve 매트릭스로 사용이 되고 있는데요. George, you used the lymph node number, harvested lymph node number and urinary retention as a parameter of learning curve in your study. Could you explain why do you select these two variables for the learning curve measurement, and how about opinion the other types of learning curve measurement such as operative time? It is, very controversial, and complication rate and the other things, and it's about its pros and cons and objectivity and subjectivity. 여러 가지 러닝 커브 사용되는 것에 대해서 의견을 좀 말씀해 주실 수 있을지 요청드립니다.
Thanks. Yeah, we utilize, one of the most common outcomes used for learning curve analysis is operative time, right? And operative time is really interesting because, as we gain mastery of a particular technique, our operative time should decrease, but we also then take on more complex cases. And so then the operative time starts to increase. And we've seen that in different analyses of learning curves, of different phases of that learning curve when we classically describe learning curve as learning, consolidation, and mastery. But, in those phases, we start taking on more complex situations. And so that can confound that. Total number of lymph nodes recovered is kind of an obvious one because the completeness of dissection would be reflected in that. One limitation, though, in looking at lymph nodes is, as we all know, after total neoadjuvant therapy or even just radiation therapy, those lymph node counts can decrease considerably. And so the range is relatively small in the post-treatment setting. And so that is one limitation. We did utilize, so we looked at kind of what were the most common complications, and urinary retention happened to be the most common. And so there has to be a significant event rate for us to try to monitor it. And so that's ultimately, it was empiric how we came up with that as the outcome measure. But I'd love to hear what some of the others think.
All right, I'll just translate that in Korean. 흔한 아웃컴으로 이제 러닝 커브를 할 때 수술 시간을 많이 사용을 하는데, 이제 좀 특이한 점이 이제 프로시저를 마스터하고 좀 잘하게 되면 될수록 좀 더 컴플리케이트 복잡한 케이스를 하게 되면서 오히려 좀 수술 시간이 늘어나는 경향도 있어가지고 그런 점을 고려해가지고 또 수술 시간을 그 정보가 부족하기도 해서 그렇게 그거를 사용하지 않았다고 말씀을 하셨고, 또 하나는 림프노드 개수는 이제 당연히 이제 어떤 프로시저 그 라테럴 페빅 림프노드 다이섹션의 컴플리트너스를 평가를 하기 위해서는 림프노드 숫자를 넣어야 되는 게 당연하다고 생각을 했고, 제한점으로는 이제 네오어주먼트 키모테라피를 받으면 숫자들이 좀 줄어들긴 하는데, 뭐, 여기 연구에 포함되어 있는 환자들은 다 그 키모테라피를 받았기 때문에 그런 점은 고려를 해주셔야 될 것 같고, 마지막으로 유리너리 리텐션을 사용한 점은 이제 가장 흔한 합병증을 찾다 보니까 유리너리 컴플리케이션이 나와가지고 그거를 사용했다고 말씀하셨습니다.
최기석 교수님 어떠세요? 생각보다 최기석 교수님은 러닝커브 굉장히 길게 발표하셨던 걸로 제가 기억하는데 그게 굉장히 이상했거든요. 이게 무슨 일이지? 이런 생각이었는데 어떻게 생각하시는지 러닝커브 이슈에 대해서. 김정일 교수님 요거는 통역을
네,
해주시죠.
She's asking Professor Chig how he's thinking about it because he previously published a learning curve with a much more cases of numbers that's needed to master this procedure. Like, I think it was 50 or 60, but yeah.
Yes.
So she's asking about his opinion.
22, actually. 22.
아마도 조지양 선생님 저보다 훨씬 나으니까.
이런 질문은
예,
곤란합니다.
러닝 커브가 짧아질 것 같은데, 우선 러닝 커브에 대해서 잠깐 제 의견을 말씀드리면, 첫 번째는 이 논문 제목에도 나와 있다시피, 서양인 관점에서 이런 러닝 커브가 나올 만한 어떤 그 데이터셋을 이렇게 발표해 주신 거에 대해서 제가 감사드리고 축하드리고 싶은 생각이 첫 번째고, 그다음에 굉장히 큰 센터이고 리퍼럴 센터임에도 불구하고 사실 10년 동안 한 50에 조금 더 되는 케이스거든요. 그러면 이제 이게 분산이 돼서 이제 최근에 아마 조금 더 많이 하셨고 저번에 조금 띄엄띄엄 하셨을 것 같긴 한데, 그럼에도 불구하고 러닝 커브를 찾기가 굉장히 어려운 어떤 그런 디지즈 이거 프로시더이기 때문에 오히려 이게 더 의미를 가지는 것 같지 않는가 이렇게 생각이 됩니다. 왜냐하면 이게 매번 있는 것 같으면 러닝 커브가 굉장히 쉽게 나오고, 그 다음에 어떤 그 베리어블 찾기도 굉장히 좋은데도 불구하고 10년에 걸쳐 한 50개 정도밖에 없기 때문에 사실 이게 러닝 커브의 어떤 베리어블을 찾기도 힘들고 그 의미를 찾기도 오히려 힘들고 이제 그런 게 있을 것 같다는 생각이 듭니다. 그 다음에는 저기 모든 러닝 커브가 대개 한 세 페이지, 이게 1, 2, 3 페이지, early phase, intermediate, listen phase 이렇게 돼 있는데, 아까 말씀하셨다시피 처음에는 정말 러닝 커브, 두 번째는 조금 더 앰비션 가지고 또 많이 하니까 또 어떤 게 생기고, 세 번째는 이제 좀 다듬어가는 관계. 그래서 그걸 보면 여기에 포지티브 레이트도 조금 차이가 있더라고요. 처음에 있는 것보다 올라갔다가 오히려 이제 또 떨어지게 돼 있습니다. 그래서 이게 인디케이션이 좀 늘어날수록 또 포지티브 레이트도 좀 떨어지게 되고, 오히려 컴플리케이션도 아마 이게 페이지별로 다를 수 있을 것 같다는 생각이 들고, 제 질문을 드리고 싶은 거는 이 변하는 터닝 포인트마다 어떤 계기가 있었는지, 어떠한 특별한 뭐 테크닉의 변화가 있었다든지, 어떠한 프로시디어가 뭐 달라졌다든지, 스탠다다이제이션을 어떻게 했다든지 하는 그 계기 때문에 이루어진 것인지, 아니면 자연적인 흐름 속에서 나온 데이터인지, 이게 이제 참 중요하다고 보거든요. 왜냐하면 10년이나 됐는데 뭔가 변했을 것 같아요. 그래서 TNT는 언제쯤 들어갔고 그게 주는 결과는 어떻고, 이런 거를 좀 오늘 자세히 설명해 주시면 좋겠다는 생각이 듭니다.
Okay. First of all,
네,
Professor Che,
저, 네.
yeah, congratulated on publishing this report as a Western point of view. It's a very difficult procedure to make a learning curve because it is very rare. Like in this paper, it's only 50 or so cases in 10 years. The main question is that is there some kind of changes that you made in the different turning points of the three phases? So like you did something else to standardize the procedure, or was it just going in a natural flow, or like something like he mentioned TNT. Was TNT involved in some of the phases? Could you answer this?
Yeah, thank you for the comments and the questions. And for sure, the experience is relatively small compared to yours as an example. And this is not, our strategy. This is for a few different reasons. Number one, we did not look at open node dissection at all in this series. In the very beginning, there were actually very few cases per year. I think we put in the paper a plot over time of, I didn't show that, but of how many cases per year. And that number has continued to rise. And as you pointed out, we show in one of the tables the overall incidence of positivity, and that has declined over time, down to 25% now, indicating that we have less, we probably have more reasonable selection criteria than we did before, probably too strict in the past. So, but in terms of, so I think over time, we may have not reached the third phase of the learning curve. And the other comment I should actually say is that when in CUSUM analysis, particularly for using the sample mean, which is a classic way of doing it, then that analysis changes over time because as a sample mean goes up and if our overall rate continues to rise, then our deviation from that sample mean will change yet again, and therefore the curves may look different. So that's kind of something, sort of a subtle feature of CUSUM analysis that we probably should think about. And so a classic example would be if you're comparing, over a single time, like you're comparing sort of the same data set, but the first half versus the entire data set, then that analysis may look a little different. So I would say it's not that Professor Choi's learning curve was longer than ours, probably shorter, but I think it reflects that sample size issue and also different indications probably, which resulted in a larger number of cases. So in terms of what has changed, I think, over the past several years, our technique certainly has evolved. When we first started to do this, there wasn't even internationally great standardization of the technique. And actually it's through discussions and interactions, that we all have together as an international community. Actually, a lot of those discussions happening at Professor Choi's Robot Camp, that happens every year, where we, I think, really start to think about standardization of technique. When I look at the CUSUM analysis and see those inflection points, I don't know that I can point to, we did this differently, but certainly over the course of those years, there was gradual evolution of the technique. So it's a really interesting question, and it would be really great if we could sort of tease that out. I suspect that given the number of cases, it'll be very difficult to do that. Like, when was that? Did we actually start to do things specifically differently? But I will say that the approach is much more systematic today than it was when we first started, and likely reflects both, not only the number of lymph nodes recovered, but also probably less trauma today than historically or than earlier on, which may reflect the differences in some of the retention rates.
All right, I'll translate in Korean. 케이스 적은 거는 뭐 알고 계시다시피 뭐 오픈 안 들어갔고 최근에 좀 증가하는 그런 인디케이션을 좀 넓혀가지고 증가는 하고 있는데 이 Qsum 분석을 고려를 할 때 샘플 민을 사용하기 때문에 이게 장기적으로 시간이 변함에 따라서 이 결과가 바뀌게 된다는 것을 말씀을 하셨고요. 그래서 예를 들어서 지금 이 정도 케이스에 적은 숫자로 했을 때 이런 커브가 나왔지만, 뭐, 이거가 첫 번째 페이지고 만약에 두 번째 페이지가 또 있다면은 다른 결과가 나올 수도 있다는 말씀을 하셨고, 정확히 어떤 변화가 있었는지를 살펴보면은 뭐 가장 중요하게 생각하는 건 최기수 교수님께서 주최하신 로봇 캠프에서 그 많은 토론을 하고 그 세계에서 모여가지고 스탠더디제이션을 하는 그런 자리가 있었다는 거를 멘션을 하셨고, 하지만 정확하게 어떠한 프로시저가 이런 변화를 일으켰다고 하기에는 좀 분석하기는 어렵지 않을까 이렇게 말씀하셨습니다.
네, 감사합니다. 사실은 지금 두 대가의 대화를 저희가 듣고 있지만, 개봉현 교수님이나 박윤영 교수님, 저는 이제 액티브 서전이지 않습니까? 이제 막, 이제 그로잉업하는 서전들 입장에서는 이 러닝 커브를 보는 게 조금 다를 수 있을 것 같습니다. 그래서 다른 술기에 이미 다 익숙해져 있는 상태에서 러닝 커브가 올라가는 거는 저는 조주장 선생님 디스커션에서도 말씀하신 크로스오버 어떤 이펙트가 있다고 생각을 하는데 실제로 이제 저희가 다른 뭐 술기들도 러닝커브를 겪고 있고 이 라테랄 로드도 러닝커브를 겪고 있다면 이 러닝커브에 대해서 이제 바라보는 관점이 좀 다를 수가 있을 텐데 이봉윤 교수님, 박윤영 교수님 이 러닝커브 요 이슈에 대해서 혹시 이제 본인들의 러닝커브를 세팅할 때 어떤 기준으로 삼는 게 있는지 궁금하고 또 다른 이 논문에 대해서 디스커션 포인트가 있으신지 좀 궁금합니다.
네, 토리대 개봉입니다. 너무 좋은 강의와 좋은 논문을 보게 돼서 감사하게 생각하고 있습니다. 질문이 하나 있는데요. 테이블 2에 라테랄 펠빅 림프노드에 대한 테이블에 그 림프노드 디섹션 타입에 옵추레이터만 한 것도 있고 인터널 이약만 한 것도 있고 두 개를 다 한 그룹이 제시가 돼 있거든요. 혹시 이게 그 54명의 프로시저가 다 동일한 노드 디섹션이 아니라 영역이 좀 다른 부분도 있는 건지 그 한번 제일 처음으로 질문을 하고 싶습니다. 김영일 교수님 마이크가
Okay. Yeah.
예.
So this is the question from Professor K from the Catholic University. He wants to ask if in table 2 it shows that there's the type of procedure of lateral pelvic node dissection. There's the obturator dissection, internal iliac lymph node dissection, and both. Was there no unified procedure for all of the lateral lymph node dissections?
Yeah, it's a great question and observation. And, we used, particularly in the beginning, our imaging to try to identify the target for dissection. And I think it's often hard to know whether you're looking at obturator lymph nodes or internal iliac lymph nodes. And often when you're, one area sort of bleeds into the other, particularly the medial obturator aspect along the distal internal iliac, kind of around the inferior vesicular, et cetera. On the lateral aspect of the internal iliac, is that obturator or internal iliac, et cetera. But I think earlier on, if it was very clear where our target was, we dissected that region and perhaps try to avoid completely skeletonizing the internal iliac because there's a lot of fibrosis, especially after neoadjuvant therapy. But that was so as you can see, the vast majority had both areas dissected, and that is our current approach. And maybe that speaks to Professor Choi's comment from earlier about, do we have a change? Well, that was probably one change, is that, we dissected the entire or both regions rather than sort of focusing on kind of the one or the other. And was most classically would be obturator. Really, that meant lateral to the internal iliac and its branches, right? Just not between the branches of the internal iliac. We did perform when there was, and as we still do, as everyone I think has experienced, those who have performed this procedure, when there is evidence, when there's metastasis to an internal iliac lymph node, very often it's not possible to dissect the vessels, right? We have to resect them together. And so, that would still be consistent with our current approach.
예, 지적해 주신 대로 이 연구에 포함된 환자들 초반 케이스들은 보면은 그 MRI에서 그쪽 부위에 있는 게 확실하게 보이면은 거기 부위만 좀 리저널하게 리섹션 하는 거를 목표로 했었는데, 최근에는, 현재 프로토콜은 이제 전부 다 풀 컴플릿 리섹션을 하는 게 현재 프로토콜이라고, 그게 아마 이제 러닝 커브에서 변한 것 중에 하나인 것 같다고 말씀할 수.
제 비슷한 질문이 될 수도 있는데요. 유사한 그 연장선상의 질문을 드리자면, 해보면 저는 아직까지도 익숙하지 않은 것 같은데, 라테랄 로우 디섹션을 할 때 러닝 커브를 결정하는 거는 디시전인 것 같습니다. 제 생각에는. 인디케이티드, 서스피셔스 노드가 있을 때, 베스를 많이 이렇게 붙어 있고 그러면 라이게이션을 해야 될 때도 있고 다이섹션을 해서 베스를 아까 말씀하신 스켈레토나이제이션 해야 되는 케이스들도 있고 그런데 이걸 살려야 되나 잡아도 되고 날려야 되나 이런 것들을 결정을 하는데 시간도 많이 소요되고 지금 이 논문에서처럼 BMI가 거의 30에 육박하는 되게 뚱뚱한 사람들에서는 기름이 너무 많이 나오고 로봇으로 하기 되게 힘든 상황에서 베슬에 대한 게 좀 걱정이 되고 이런 것들이 되게 러닝커브에 영향을 많이 준다라고 생각을 하거든요. 그래서 혹시 라테랄 림프노드 디섹션을 이렇게 오베이스 하는 사람들을 하면서 베슬 라이게이션을 하는 정도에 따라서 어디를 잡고 그런 디시전 메이킹을 하는 그 과정이 러닝커브 안에 들어가야 되는 거 아닌가 하는 생각을 좀 하고 있는데요. 이런 거에 대해서 어떻게 생각을 하시는지. 좀 질문이 좀 정리가 안 돼.
I think this is a very important question. He asked if, he also agrees on that the decision on making, ligating the vessels and saving the vessels, I think it's a very important thing and it takes a lot of time. And, it's very hard for us to make a decision on those obese patients like in the US. He asked whether the vessel ligation and saving should have been included in this learning curve, because maybe those patients were excluded, right? Could you tell us your opinion on this?
We did not exclude those patients from this study. The patients that were excluded was when the lateral compartment was resected en bloc with the primary tumor. So we can have tumor extension, or through vascular invasion, we can have tumor extension across into the lateral compartment, right? And in that setting, we will perform an unblocked resection robotically of the primary and the lateral compartment, and that obviously includes the vessels. So those where the unblocked resection of the vessels were necessary as part of the lymph node dissection, but separate from the primary tumor, they were included in the study. But we did not, in this report, we didn't collect that information about whether we did an unblocked vascular ligation with the lymph nodes or not, but it's a good question.
박윤영 교수님 어떠세요?
네, 안녕하세요. 이제 막 러닝 커브에 있는 저를 이제 패널리스트로 초대해 주셔서 너무 감사드리고요. 이제 제가 처음에 이 논문을 봤을 때 이제 이미 개봉 교수님도 이제 언급하셨지만 인상적이었던 게 페이즈 1에서는 이제 옵트레이터 노드만 디섹션 한 그룹들이 많이 포함이 돼 있었고 페이즈 2, 페이즈 3로 가면서 이제 점차 일리악 노드를 같이 다이섹션 한 환자들이 포함됐다는 거를 이제 확인했을 때 조금 안도감이 사실은 있었고요. 네, 이제 마지막 최근 케이스 가 있었는데 그 케이스에서도 이제 옵트레이터 컴파트먼트에 인라지드 림프노드가 많이 있었고 인터널 컴파트먼트에는 없었기는 했지만 이제 막상 수술을 들어가니까 유레터로 그 하이포게스트릭 플레인과 그 인터널 일리악 사이의 스페이스를 찾을 수 없을 정도로 파이브로시스가 심해서 마지막에 그 부분을 다이섹션을 해야 되는 것인가 말아야 되는 것인가 굉장히 고민을 하다가 이제 너무 데미지가 심할 것 같아서 포기하고 나왔었는데요. 그 이후에 이제 컴플릿 리섹션을 하지 못해서 하지 않은 부분에서 나중에 이제 라테럴 리커런스 같은 게 생기면 어떡하나라는 이제 여러 가지 걱정들도 들고 그랬었습니다. 그래서 일단 러닝 커브에 있어서 이제 옵트레이터 컴파트먼트만 이제 하셨다는 것 자체에도 이제 약간의 위로가 됐었고요, 저한테는. 이제 그래서 이제 제가 드리고 싶은 질문은 그 이제 옵츄레이터 컴파트먼트만 그 다이섹션 했던 환자들 중에서 그 다이섹션 하지 않았던 부분에서 이제 라테랄 노드의 리커런스를 경험하신 적이 있는지를 여쭙고 싶고요. 이렇게 파이브로시스가 심해서 다이섹션 플레인을 찾지 못하는 경우에 이제 어떻게 하시는지를 좀 여쭙고 싶습니다.
This is Professor Park. She has a question, and also she thanked Professor Zhang because she was relieved that she saw that only in the phase 1 that patients who received obturator node dissection was included, because recently she experienced a difficult patient that showed obturator node, a positive obturator node in the MRI, but not in the internal nodes. And when she went into the operation room, OR room, the fibrosis was so severe and it was a difficult case, and she couldn't perform the full dissection. And she was relieved looking at this results from the paper. But the question is that in those patients who was performed only in the obturator region, did you experience any recurrence in the other lateral compartments?
Yeah, great question and comment. And, certainly, it is important that we identify all the areas of disease and completely dissect the areas of disease. So with respect to, and totally appreciate the situation that you are in, because I think one of the questions I always ask myself also is, these are small vessels often, despite a large patient and a lot of, I think, as mentioned earlier, like a lot of fat that is now melted. And so it gets quite oily during the operation, and that management can be a little bit of a challenge for sure. And the question always comes is, wow, in order to do the skeletonization of the internal iliac branches, there's potential risk to the superior or inferior vesicular, most commonly are the ones that we worry about. I guess with the contralateral side intact, it's less of an issue. But still, as surgeons, we always want to preserve as much normal anatomy as possible, right? And so that certainly, and I think that was probably our initial evolution, which is like trying not to cause unnecessary damage during the surgery, and also recognizing that the autonomic nerves are going to be medial to the internal iliacs, etc. We have had cases of persistent lateral pelvic lymph node disease, which I think is more. I don't know that to answer specifically the question, did those have recurrence in the internal iliac? I'd have to go back and look at the data to see if any of those patients had recurrence in the internal iliac. However, we have had a couple of cases. I think that's really more of that's really more of an incomplete dissection issue, I think, than what did we dissect. In other words, I'm not. I think early in the learning curve of this operation for anybody, there is the potential risk, the most common locations being the very, very distal internal iliac compartment, right over the distal aspects of the sacral nerve roots. I think that is sort of a common missed location, and another potential high risk area is behind the confluence of the external and internal iliac vein when we have a high lymph node, and that can be missed during a standard dissection. So, and those are two examples of where I know we have had some missed cases. Not many, fortunately. Those are the two I can think of. And when you have a missed case, and this is all in full disclosure here. So when you have a missed case, I think you never forget that one, because as surgeons, sort of this is something that we consider a failure on our own parts. So, but I can't tell you if those cases where we didn't dissect fully the internal iliac compartment, if those had recurrences. I don't have that recollection.
네, 말씀하시기를 이제 컴플리트 다이섹션이 굉장히 중요하긴 하고 어렵다는 거에 동의를 하고, 특히 이렇게 비만인 환자들한테서 하기 굉장히 어렵다고 말씀을 하셨고, 하지만 외과 의사로서 최대한 살리려고 해부학적으로 불필요한 데미지는 안 주려고 하는 노력이 필요하다고 말씀을 하시고요. 그 리커한 케이스들이 있긴 있는데 그 옵트레이터를 한 환자들에서 그 다른 컴파트먼트, 인터널 일리아 컴파트먼트나 이쪽에 리커를 한 환자들이 있는지는 잘 모르겠다. 왜냐하면 아직 확인을 좀 해보셔야겠다고 말씀을 하셨고, 근데 꼭 거기만 해서, 거기를 안 해서 생겼다기보다는 뭐 다른 이유들도 있을 것 같다고 말씀을 하시고, 뭐 아주 디스탈 옵트레이터 컴파트먼트나 뭐 익스터널 일리아 베인의 컨플루언스 그쪽 같이 좀 다이섹션이 좀 비교적 어려운 부분에 대해서는 그런 것들에 대해서도 리커를 하는데 중요한 역할이 있지 않을까 이렇게 말씀을 하셨습니다.
픽이 굉장히 많은 이슈라서 이 질문이 많은 것 같습니다. 청중 중에서 혹시 질문이 있으신 분 있으시면 말씀해 주시겠어요?
이철승
아,
선생님,
네네네. 그 이철승 선생님, 네. 네, 이철승 선생님 질문해 주시겠습니다.
채팅으로 빨리 올리죠. 채팅으로.
채팅으로 보내주십시오. 그러면 채팅으로 보내주시고, 예, 김열 교수님 질문 받으시면 전달해 주시고, 이 림프노드 넘버도 중요한데, 사실 그 타겟했던 노드를 다 제거했느냐를 확인하는 것도 러닝 커브의 굉장히 중요한 포인트, 저는 이제 생각이 되긴 하더라고요. 근데 노드 다이섹션 하고 나서 그 사진을 찍어보고 싶지 않은 그런 이상한 기분이 드는 경우가 있어서 실제로는 림프노드 넘버 외에 이제 타겟했던 노드를 다 제거했느냐를 확인하는 것도 이런
there's so many questions in the chat room, but I'll just get one out from Professor Park Ji-won. This is an interesting study that investigates the learning curve for lateral pelvic lymph node. The study utilizes QSUM analysis to evaluate the learning curve. If a risk-adjusted QSUM analysis is conducted, taking into account patient risk factors, would the number of cases required to reach the learning curve change?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And first I have to state parenthetically that I don't believe that we have achieved the end of the learning curve. I think, we will continue to develop here, but probably the sample size is there aren't enough people with different risk factors that we can use to do the risk adjustment, right? So I think what's difficult in regular surgery is difficult here. So very high BMI is difficult no matter what. And I think that if we have extensive nodal disease with extensive fibrosis, that can be more difficult, although in some ways easier because we just take the entire internal iliac and the entire compartment. So that's actually easier than doing the dissection. So to answer your question, probably, but I'm not sure that we'll be able to determine that with this data, just in terms of sample size. But Professor Choi has a larger set. I wonder what he thinks.
네, 그래서 지금 현재 그 데이터가 러닝 커브의 종류라고 생각하지는 않고 지금 샘플 사이즈가 워낙 적기 때문에 그래서 뭐 말씀하신 대로 리스크 어저스트를 하면은 뭐 BMI 어저스팅하고 뭐 엑스텐시브 노드 이런 것도 다 확인을 해가지고 리스크 어저스트먼트를 하면은 도움은 되겠지만 지금의 이 샘플을 갖고는 확인은 어렵다고 말씀을 하셨습니다.
저희 그 질문이 굉장히 많으실 텐데 저희 시간이 굉장히 한정되어 있습니다. 그래 오늘 핫 디스커션이 이걸로 마무리하는 걸로 하겠습니다. 모두 이 디스커션에 참여해 주셔서 감사드리고요. George, very thank you to joining our Korean Journal Club. Your insightful comments and summary and it's very meaningful to us. Thank you. 참석해 주셔서 모두 감사드리고요. 예, 다음에 참석하신 분들 굿나잇 되시길 바라고 아침에 참석하신 분들 have a good day. 좋은 하루
Thank
보내시길
you.
바랍니다. 예. 저희 다음은 1월 21일에 뵙는 걸로 하겠습니다. 모두 감사합니다. 좋은
Thank you,
하루
George.
되세요.
Thank you.
Thank you.
감사합니다.
감사합니다.
수고했어요,
감사합니다.
네.
감사합니다.